don't know Yossi, Yossi is a great friend of the PINSKER Center, and he is a real role model to all of us. Yossi was Brigadier General in the IDF. He was head of the research division of Israeli intelligence. Thereafter, he was Director General of Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs, and he is now a senior fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. So if you want an authority on issues surrounding diplomacy and intelligence, you really won't get anyone better than Yossi. Yeah, it's a real privilege to have your take on these issues. My first question to you, Yossi, and it's a question that you might have to diplomatically answer, is did you expect this? Did you expect there to be peace all of a sudden or normalization of ties? Was this a surprise to you, or did you see it coming?
Well, I'm amongst the very few people who saw that coming. As a matter of fact, if you go back to my paper from May on the issue of extending Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, what I was saying in the end of it was that because it's so controversial and many people want us to stick to the status quo, the one thing they should do in order to convince us to give up on the idea of extending the sovereignty, Israeli sovereignty over parts of Judea and Samaria, is to give us something that is also valuable. And among those things that are valuable, I mentioned the option of normalizing our relations with the Arab states. And I've been advocating for a long time that the time is ripe for breaking the ceiling that was allegedly there and prevented us from establishing full diplomatic relations and full normalization with the Gulf states, especially with the UAE. Because in my mind, the situation, so many things have changed in the situation since the last 5-10 years, and under Trump, the conditions were ripe for such a breakthrough. There was an intention to focus on the other option, on the sovereignty option, that for Israel is more important than having normal relations with the UAE, and that as long as this was the option, more emphasis was given to that option. But once in May, when after Pompeo paid a visit to Israel, and everybody had the chance to express their view about the sovereignty option, the American administration, at least part of it, got cold feet about it, and they decided not to support this move. And following that, this option became more relevant, as it was relevant for a couple of years in my mind, and was possible. I would say in this respect that all those who didn't think that this is possible are not real experts. That's I can tell you. It's because this is a major issue. These are a lot of what people say about the relations between us and the Arabs is politically is politics disguised as expertise, and many people that call themselves experts actually represent a certain attitude, and they are totally concerned about the need to give the Palestinians everything they want. And they say that Israel is not going to be democratic and Jewish if we don't give the Palestinians everything they want. We shall never have normalization if we don't give the Palestinians everything they want. We shall never have a day of quiet and tranquility if we don't give the Palestinians everything they want. And once we give the Palestinians everything they want, everything is going to be great. We gave the Palestinians everything they want in several rounds. We didn't get anything in return. And in fact, we can move forward with the pragmatic Arabs because look, the situation has changed, as I said, in the last 5 to 10 years. Many things happened that created the conditions that made this possibility ripe. First of all, the Iranian threat became much more tangible, much more felt by everybody in the region. And ever since what's called the Arab Spring, but actually was the Arab upheaval, started, that threat of radical groups to the pragmatists in the Middle East became so clear that they needed everybody who could help them in order to support them. Now, the only real power that is ready to take radicalism up front is Israel. on Israel you can rely. Israel is never going to change its color. The United States, for 8 years, was under Obama. It was supporting the radical, not the pragmatists, but the radical. It brought the JCPOA. The JCPOA was the main reason why this became possible, because everybody realized what the international community wants is to help Iran have a nuclear weapon. They say they don't want Iran ever to have a nuclear weapon, but they do everything in order to make it possible for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And once Iran has nuclear weapons, the entire pragmatic world is going to suffer heavily. So the only power you can rely upon that will never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon is Israel. And Israel is also a force that you can rely upon on many other issues, but first and foremost on that. Also, it was proven day in, day out in the way Israel fought against the Iranian presence in Syria, in the way Israel was ready to take kinetic actions to prevent the Iranians from delivering weapons to Hezbollah. Every time this has happened, the people in the Gulf states were saying to themselves, why are we not having open relations with this state that fights for us? So this was a major development. A second major development was that Israel managed to expose the truth about the Palestinian policy. That it is not some sort of a territorial disagreement between us and the Palestinians, but it is the Palestinians who are committed to taking the Arab support in order to make Israel disappear. Now, it's not that the rest of the Arabs mind if Israel disappears, although it's bad for them because of the Iranian issue, but it's not something that they would fight for Israel. But to spend all their efforts for something that is not feasible, to give an endless amount of support, money and whatever it is, for something that is not going to happen anyhow. Israel is there to stay, is here to stay. So
where does that leave the Palestinians then, Yossi? Where do the Palestinians get left after this normalization of ties? What does this mean for the Palestinians?
Well, the Palestinians were, the other people besides me who thought this is possible were the Palestinians. They were very afraid that this is going to happen. And if you look back at what Abu Mazen was saying in the last couple of years, he repeatedly warned the Arabs, don't do that. Don't move towards normalization of relations with Israel before I get everything I want. And now he realizes that this first move by the United Arab Emirates, that's probably going to be followed by moves by other pragmatic Arab states, is actually taking the carpet from underneath his feet, because his entire argument was that the Arab world is behind me and you can never move forward, and I have the key to Arab normalization. You want to be integrated into the region, that's your dream, Israelis, okay, but if you wanted to make it happen, you have to use my key. Well, turns out that we can have it without his key, and this turns them into totally helpless and unable to really threaten Israel with, or tempt Israel with all kinds of other things that may happen if Israel gives up to all the Palestinian demands. And the Arabs were saying to themselves, and are exposing it now, we are not dancing to your flute anymore. It's enough is enough. You took our money. You have positions that cannot be defended. You want everything. You show no readiness to sit to the table for negotiations. You show no flexibility. Your rejectionism is the reason why there's no peace. So thank you very much. And we do what is best for our interest. And the best way to serve our interest is to have open relations with Israel. And this put the Palestinians in a very difficult position, because it's not the Israelis who do something against them. They are used to that, or used at least to saying that. It's their old friends, the Emirates, that gave so much money and so much effort for them. And what have they done with all of that? And so this is something that's really frustrating. You know, there's this song, this Palestinian song, Wen el Malayin, where are the millions? Where are the Arab millions? Why don't they support us? They always complain. Even when they get all the support, they complain. Now at least they have a good reason to complain, and the Arabs have a good reason to make them complain.
Do you think this means that the UAE is going to take a step forward in terms of pushing the Palestinians to negotiate with Israel, or do you see this as a step back where they say we've already tried and we give up with you guys? You're clearly not.
I think it's a step forward by itself. It's saying to the Palestinians, listen, you want our help, sit to the table with the Israelis and present a reasonable position, not a stubborn position that leads nowhere. You want our support, we are ready, we are for you. We saved you from annexation, as they call it, right?
Yeah.
We are the ones who are really doing something for you, because if it was for your stubborn and intransigence, you would see Israel taking part of your land. So we saved your land, but do us a favor, make us a favor, and do us a favor and sit to the table. And in this last interview that their Foreign Affairs State Minister Kargash had with Barak Ravid, he said, listen, we saved the Palestinians from this annexation. We did something for them. But if they keep refusing to sit at the table, then we may reconsider. Now, much depends here, of course, on what's going to happen in the elections in the United States in November. If the Democratic Party is going to win the elections, as many spectators believe, then the Palestinians may somehow believe that the United States is going to stand on their side and put some pressure on Israel. Maybe they're going to be able to get something. I'm not sure it's going to be the case, but this is what they believe. Definitely, they don't feel that there is a need to be to show any flexibility just because of the Emirates move or because of the messages coming from the United States, because let's wait to November. But if it turns out that this is not a policy of the Democrats, doubt that it's going to be this case, or if Trump is reelected, then the pressures on the Palestinians are going to double. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be very difficult for the Palestinians to go on with this policy. And maybe, hopefully, there's going to be enough pressure over the Palestinians so that they will have to reconsider their position in the context of the peace process and adopt some more reasonable positions and give up their, let's say, fraudulent and stupid in a way narrative that prevents any sort of progress between us and the Palestinians, because they refuse to accept that Israel is a nation state, that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, because there is no Jewish people according to them, and because there's no Jewish sovereign history in Palestine according to them. All kinds of nonsense that are the pillars upon which the Palestinian narrative is based, and that the Palestinians should struggle against Zionism until its demise. What the Arab, not only the Emirates, many Arabs are telling the Palestinians right now, and you see the reaction to the move in the Arab world. Many people support the UAE. It's not that the UAE, you know, when Egypt did it back in 77, 79,
yeah.
The reaction in the Arab world was very antagonistic, very, very bad. Today, on the contrary, everybody, and look, Egypt did it in order to get its land back. What did the United Arab Emirates get? Nothing. Egypt did it in order to form a cold peace. The peace we have with Egypt and Jordan is a cold peace. This is for the first time. This is an historical move, because it's for the first time that we are going to have a warm peace with an Arab state. It's only for having warm relations. It's not about getting some land back. It's this is where we stand, and so the message of the Arabs to the Palestinians is, why fight in order to destroy Israel? Israel is a force for the good. Enough with this nonsense. And if Trump is reelected, the pressure over the Palestinians to make some changes is going to grow significantly.
For the Emirates, what is it specifically in relation to intelligence that they will gain from this normalization? What can Israel offer as an intelligence ally to the Emirates specifically?
Well, you know, the major threat that the Emirates faces is the Iranian threat, and I think Israel proves every day how good its intelligence on the Iranians is. Taking the archives was just one, the archives from Tehran was just one case in which Israel proved how good its intelligence on Iran is, and which Israel took responsibility. All kinds of things are happening. Nobody knows who does them, but some people think it's Israel as well. And look at what and the way Israel hits precisely everything that's coming from Iran to Syria again and again and again and again. And believe me, the Iranians do lessons learned, try to learn lessons from every attack and improve themselves, and still they're caught again and again and again. So it's, Israel can help a lot in this. And against other potential enemies that the UAE has, Israel can help as well, radical Islam and things like that. And Israel has the capabilities of collecting the information in a way that is giving you an advantage. And that's something that the UAE needs. I think it's not that it cannot be done without open diplomatic relations. It can be done without it, and it has been probably done without it. But once you have an embassy and official open presence, legal presence over there, it's easier, much easier, of course.
Is the Israeli intelligence community worried about Erdogan and the noises he's been making about our relationship with the Arab world and the potential for now Bahrain and other countries to fall in line with the UAE? Should we be worried about Erdogan?
Well, I don't know about the Israeli intelligence community. I cannot share with you what little I know, and out of that business for a while. But I think that they should be worried. That's the important thing. They should be worried about Erdogan. Erdogan has for a long time been a leader of one of the strides of radicalism in the region. So we have the radicals that belong to the Iranian axis, Shiite radical axis, and we have the radicals that belong to the extreme Sunni axis, that's ISIS and Al Qaeda, and we have the radicals that belong to the more sophisticated Sunni radical axis, which is the axis led by the Muslim Brotherhood. And this axis is, for practical purposes, led by Turkey, by Erdogan. It's not a big axis today, but it's a very problematic one, nevertheless. It has branches all over the Middle East, but it has 2.5 heads, which are Turkey, first and foremost, Qatar, just next to it, and Hamas. These are the 3 territories this axis controls. And they are trying to control more land, and the major battle they are involved in right now is in Libya, where they support the Sarraj government. And by that, they're posing a threat to Egypt, which belongs to the pragmatic camp. And so what we're seeing, there is a potential here of tension. Now, Israel, one of the major developments that happened with this new agreement was, I hope to see an agreement between a new coming agreement with the UAE, is that Israel is becoming an open participant of the pragmatic camp. It's important for us to strengthen the pragmatic camp. It's important for the pragmatic camp to be strengthened by the Israeli participation. And once we become more involved in the pragmatic camp, the activities of the radicals of the stride of Erdogan against them becomes more and more relevant to us. And the UAE is very much in favor of Haftar, and in Libya, let's take, for example, they are involved in Yemen, they are involved in a lot of stuff. Once you side with the UAE, you get more entangled in those confrontations and conflicts, and it comes with a certain price, I guess. We should be more interested in what's going on in these places. Yes, and on top of that, Erdogan is problematic because of his support for Hamas, which is, as I said, another member of this axis, he is not only supporting them, he supports the Palestinians from every kind, and he's trying to get more and more involvement and influence inside the Palestinian camp. He's very active in Jerusalem. So he's not, and he keeps speaking about Jerusalem. He keeps speaking about how he wants to liberate Jerusalem and so on and so forth. So it's definitely something that we should be worried about. That said, we do have diplomatic relations with Turkey. We have an enormously huge trade with Turkey. There are economic ties and transportation and flights are coming from Istanbul, 6 flights a day or something like that. It's we are very close economically to the Turks, so we have to work it out very sensitively.
Yeah. Throughout our conversations that we've had sort of since February, and through a lot of the articles that you've written, you define many countries according to 2 different camps, pragmatic and the non-pragmatic. What makes a country pragmatic in this sphere? What makes them pragmatic?
Well, a lot of things, but first of all, it's a matter of ideology. It's a matter of the question of what is Islam all about? Is Islam committed to fighting Westernism and denying Westernism, denying Western ideals, and so on and so forth, which is radicalism? Or is it that Islam is a religion of peace that has to find a way to live in this global system, that has to make sure that it is capable to compete in this global system, and it has to invest in improving the quality of its people in order for them to be more able to compete in this global system. And then, if everybody sees how great the Muslims are, maybe everybody will decide to become Muslim, because all Islam, pragmatic or non-pragmatic, eventually wants everybody to be Muslim. But the radicals think that you have to fight for that. Some of them say right now, these are the ultra radicals. Some of them say, well, maybe later, once we have a nuclear weapon. And some of them will say maybe even later than that, once we have enough power in the West, and so on and so forth. All kinds of ways of different timetables. But the pragmatists say, it's not that we like Western ideas, but we don't have to fight against them. And we can adopt many of them because it's important for us in order to be more competent in this international system. And that's pragmatism. And that's why I don't use the word moderates. I use the word pragmatist. And these people, amongst other things, they say Israel is a fact. Is a fact of life in the Middle East. We have to accept the fact. In the end of the day, Israel doesn't force them, ask them in return for establishing diplomatic relations to accept Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. That's we ask only for the Palestinians, because with the Palestinians we have an existential conflict. But from the other Arabs, we didn't ask the UAE to accept Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. And so for them, it's like, yeah, Israel is there. We know Jews are living there. We are familiar with the fact, but we are not going to make this an issue. And let's live next to Israel and cooperate together against the major threat, which is radicalism, because radicalism is ideologically challenging the philosophy of the pragmatists. And because that this is an existential battle against it. If your ideology is denied, you need to change dramatically, and they don't want to go through this change. They believe in investing in technology, investing in culture, investing in good life, investing in the economy. That's what they believe in, and fortunately, they have enough money to invest. So they were able to build a very impressive economy and a very impressive state.
Within these discussions about this historic peace agreement, I think the way you put it is really powerful. It's the first warm peace that Israel's going to have, as opposed to Egypt and Jordan, which was very much defined by sort of a cold piece, a cold reality. How much would you say that Donald Trump and his presidential style should be credited for bringing this about? To what extent is these changes that we're seeing, these dramatic changes that we're seeing, thanks to a Trump presidency?
Well, first of all, they are thanks to Obama, because the Obama policy frightened the pragmatists so much. He sided with the radicals. He gave this unbelievable prize to the Iranians of the JCPOA. Everybody got scared. Everybody said, "Whoa, this is the United States can be like that? We never thought that something like that can happen. The United States used to be our friend. The United States is committed to our security. How come?" No, Obama had an interview with Jeffrey Goldberg on the Atlantic, and he said, "I don't understand, why can't they share the Middle East between the pragmatists and the radicals? Saudi Arabia will dominate part of it, and Iran will dominate the other." I mean, if you are sitting in the UAE, you hear something like that, you start to tremble, because this is the leader of the West speaking, and he totally knows nothing about what's going on here. Doesn't understand that these people want to kill the West, and he's ready to give them a big arsenal of nuclear weapons. What's going on here? Who's going to save us? Israel. Israel is the only one we can rely upon. And so the major contributor to this situation is Obama. What Trump told them was that if you don't want Obama, if you don't want a second Obama, you should help me. I'm with you. The first place he came to on his first visit abroad was Saudi Arabia, where he gathered all the leaders of the pragmatists and told them, "I'm here for you. I'm not Obama. I'm here for you." The second thing he did was to leave the JCPOA, put pressure on Iran, put maximum pressure on Iran. Well, he called it maximum pressure, but at the beginning it was just pressure. Then it was maximum pressure. So he's on our side. We have to make sure that we don't get a second Obama. That's why one of the reasons they were ready to do it now was because they thought this is something that's going to help Trump in the coming elections. The idea that somebody that is close to Wendy Sherman is going to be sitting in the White House is keeping them awake at night.
Yeah, so this links immediately to a question that one of our students has asked. Christopher Page from the University of Durham, who is a PINSKER Center Policy Fellow, asks, with the US election coming in November, are you concerned that a change in administration could undermine the progress made by the Trump presidency? So are you scared that Joe Biden would be what you termed a second Obama?
Well, Joe Biden is not exactly a second Obama. He's a little bit more to the center than Obama. But I would say that it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what other people think. And there is a fear. There is a fear amongst the pragmatic Arabs that even if it's not a second Obama, it's definitely not going to be Trump. And the most worrying thing is that he speaks about re-entering the JCPOA, the agreement with Iran. That is something that, in my mind, is not going to have a negative impact on our relations with the Gulf. It's going to have a positive impact because they'll say, "Oh, we are again at where we were. Let's strengthen our relations with Israel." And but this is not going to be done with the United States, but directly. Just like we had most of our peace endeavors were done without the United States. Peace with Egypt was done in spite of Carter. President Carter didn't want this to happen. It was forced upon him. We can have more of this in the Middle East if Biden is elected, because these people are really afraid. These people are really afraid of losing the United States. And everybody in the United States, including Trump himself, was speaking about moving away from the Middle East and the pivot to China or pivot to Asia and all these kind of things. It is not welcomed by the pragmatists. They don't like this. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I think whatever happens, our relations with the Gulf are going to improve. If it's Trump is going to because he decided that this is more important for him now than supporting the idea of application of the Israeli law to the territories, then he's going to try to gain more on that. And if it's Biden, then out of fear, we should see the same tendency in my mind.
Do you think that in sort of 5 years' time, we'll reflect on the events of last week and this dramatic proposal as being a turning point in Middle Eastern history?
Sure. I think this is a turning point. Israel was always dreaming about the new Middle East, where we get integrated into the Middle East structure and all of that. This is the day where it happened. I mean, it was not possible if we didn't have peace with Egypt and if we didn't have peace with Jordan, as we have to remember. These are preconditions. But once we have the peace with Egypt and we have the peace with Jordan, this is the turning point, because as I said, this is a different kind of peace. This is not peace for land. This is not peace for concessions. This is peace for peace. Peace because we want to have peace. We want to have good relations with Israel. And I just hope that Israel will be attentive enough to what she is expected to do. I hope that we shall know how to handle this thing sensitively enough to make these people understand that they gain a lot of this peace. But it's easy. It's relatively easy. It's not the tense relations we have with the masses in Egypt or in Jordan. And I hope they are going to change too. I know many Jordanians and many Egyptians who think this is stupidity. And maybe what's happening with the UAE will change them as well. And I'm hopeful. But this day, if this is an historic day, it is an historic day. More than what some people want to present it. I see all these critics, all those who were against the application of the Israeli law are also skeptical about what's happening. Well, you didn't have war. What is this peace story? And you had good relations anyhow. So what are you dancing and celebrating? No, we are dancing and celebrating because the courage it takes to make under the table relations with Israel is nothing compared with the courage it takes to announce publicly that you're establishing diplomatic relations with Israel. This is something totally different. Once people feel confident enough in order to do that, and look all over the Middle East, even in countries that are very much against Israel, there are people who say, well, yeah, maybe it's a good idea. Why don't we do the same? And,
we have a question from another student, Alexander Buxton Carter, who's also from the University of Durham. He asks, do you think Bibi playing hardball with the West Bank has brought about a change in attitude? Do you think the annexation, another way of putting that is, do you think the entire topic of annexation, I tell you what, from my perspective, right, I found out about this pretty much the second that Trump tweeted. And in my head was an image in January of Trump, Bibi, and the Prince of the Emirates sat in a room going, we need a predicament whereby it will be legitimate for the Emirates to legitimize and open up, normalize relations with Israel. So what we're going to do is we're going to threaten annexation. We're going to make everyone scared. And then we're going to have these heroes come along just before the elections and say, we're about to rescue you. Do you think annexation was what led to the shift in the Emirates? Do you think that's what did it?
No, I think they made use of that. It was an opportunity, but it was not pre-planned like that. And the idea was to have application of the law and sovereignty, Israeli sovereignty to these territories. And Trump got it at one point. At one point, he got his cold feet, and people said, "Okay, so let's make some lemonade out of this lemon." And that's what happened. It would have happened anyhow. It could have happened anyhow. I think that they took advantage of this opportunity, and this was nice. This was an act of diplomacy, a nice act of diplomacy. But it wasn't because of that. They take advantage of that.
Yeah.
It wasn't pre-planned like that.
We have another question from a student from the University College of London, Arber Jaeger, who's asking, could terrorism ruin this paradigm shift? Now, to those of you from the UK who aren't really up to date with Israeli news, we've had a series of balloons that are sent over from Gaza. And having served on the Gaza border, I can tell you pretty much what this is. It's where you put balloons that float across the border that are attached with fire starters, mines, explosive devices. When I served on the border, one of these landed in a nursery just before the nursery opened and blew up in the nursery playground. So they're very dangerous, not just to people, but they're also dangerous to agriculture. And so in response, Israel launched a few airstrikes, and then there has now been missile strikes across the border. And we've also seen in the last few weeks attempted infiltration of the northern border by Hezbollah. So the question is, can terrorism ruin this peace opportunity?
No, people don't make peace and then change their mind because terror attack. And this was to be expected. I mean, we expected much more if there was to be application of Israeli sovereignty to these parts of the Judea and Samaria. And what we experience now is a very benign version of that. And I don't know, it's something that the UAE can be a target of terror operations. There are all kinds of threats that you have to bear in mind when you do something that dramatic that many people don't like, especially the Palestinians. But it's not only the Palestinians, the Iranians are extremely upset. The Turks are upset. Many people don't like the move. And the reason they don't like the move is because they understand how historic and important it is. And if it was just a minor issue, they wouldn't be that upset. But those who decide to go in this direction, they take this into account. If there is going to be a terror attack, we shall recuperate and keep going in the direction we want, and know better how good it was that we did it, because these are we going to succumb to terrorism? No. So it just proves that you don't want to be on the side of the terrorists and give them some sort of achievement. That's definitely not something that anybody wants.
I'm going to take some liberties with this one. So Jonathan, for those of you who don't know Jonathan Hunter, he's our chief exec. He's charge of the, and if we're following in with the tradition of mentioning alma mater and where they came from, Jonathan's from University of Oxford. He asks, what are the chances of other Gulf countries normalizing their ties with Israel in the next 1 to 3 years? And the examples he gives is Oman, Bahrain, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I'm going to paraphrase the question, assuming the positive, and ask, who's next?
Well, first of all, chapeau to the UAE, who managed to be the first. That's because you always remember the first, and not always remember the second. But I think that the situation is more ripe than with anybody else. It is with Bahrain, because relations with Bahrain are very close. But also with Oman, you know, Bibi was paid a visit to Oman last year. It's not something that anybody is going to fall from their chairs just because there are going to be relations between Oman and Israel. And so these things, and I don't think about the 3 coming years. I think this can be in the 3 coming months. One of them can do this move. And the reason is that they want to take this move before the elections in the United States, and there's not much time. So I'm not going to be at all surprised if something happens before the election. The big prize is Saudi Arabia. So far, the Saudis have not said anything about this development. I'm sure they are in favor. The UAE would not take such a strategic move without telling the Saudis, and so wouldn't the Americans. And the fact that the Egyptians came out in a positive attitude towards the move makes it easier for the Saudis to say something positive. But they haven't done it yet. If I was the prime minister, I would make some overture towards the Saudis, trying to convince them to take a move, because if they do it, this is a different story. Not the small countries, not the more small states. It's a big country, decisive. That said, we can expect all kinds of minor or smaller moves that are not full diplomatic relations with all of these countries. Like the Saudis are saying now, according to the Emiratis, that they are going to allow airplanes from Israel and from the UAE to fly over Saudi Arabia on their way to the other side. This is huge by itself, and because it's going to make flying to the UAE something very short, and I can already see all those Israelis waiting in line.
One would argue that the most wise diplomatic decision was to normalize ties apart from tourism. Send Omer Adam, send him, but send him alone.
No, but I mean, it seems that all the Israelis are intending to go there as soon as possible.
Believe me.
So opening the sky route is something very important for Israelis, and it's a sign that they are in favor of that. So not everything has to be open and to complete diplomatic relations. There are all kinds of things that can happen less than that.
We've had another question in from another policy fellow of the PINSKER Center, which is Sarah Kaczynski, who is also an attendee at the University of Durham. We're doing very well with Durham tonight. How will the Palestinian leadership react to the immense interest to normalize ties with Israel coming from other countries? So how are the Palestinian leadership reacting?
Well, I think the thing they're doing now, and I hope we can get some pictures of that, is that they're hitting their head on the wall and asking themselves, how did we get there? I mean, we were worried about that, but we were warning them not to do that, and still they did it. So what did we do wrong? But there's a very little soul searching. The Palestinians are not good at that. And the easiest way for them is always to stick to their policies and never change them. And the price they're paying is that they're staying alone in the dark. Nobody cares about them. The Arabs care less and less about them. Even their own population cares less and less about them. I mean, they just because Israel said that it might apply the law, they decided to cut relations with Israel. The Palestinian public ignores them and comes to Israel nevertheless. So their situation is really very, very bad, and they have less and less money because they decided not to take their money from us. Strange, and the Arabs are not going to give the money now for sure. So it's they are in a very difficult situation. I don't see them changing anything, definitely not before the election. If Trump wins, then they will have to do this soul searching, really to sit down and do this serious soul searching. And then they may be saying, okay, we tried our best, it didn't work, we have to do something different. For the time being, this is not the reaction. What they did is, you know, they cursed everybody and they took back their ambassador from the UAE. Nobody's impressed. The UAE is going to lose its extremely important relations with the Palestinians. That's something really terrible for the UAE. What did they get in return? Relations with poor Israel? Come on. What a mistake by the UAE.
Until they get those Israeli tourists. Then
maybe they will think different.
Then they'll see that they were the error of their ways. Henry Kissinger very famously said that Israel doesn't have a foreign policy. It only has a domestic policy. And what we're seeing now is actually a segment of Israeli domestic politics. You spoke about those who were against application of sovereignty. You actually have the camp who were for application of sovereignty, and they're very angry right now. What's going on there?
No, you got it wrong.
Okay.
Those who are against it are those who wanted application of sovereignty, not in the context of the peace plan. Those who are in favor of applying the sovereignty in the context of the peace plan are not against the move. They say, okay, there was no way to do it with the peace plan because the Americans, there's no way to apply sovereignty without American support. The Americans decided not to support it. So we can take a compensation prize. Relations with the UAE is great, it's important, it's wonderful, we take it. Those who are in favor of applying the sovereignty, not in the context of the peace plan of the United States, but unilaterally, totally unilaterally, they are upset because they thought Israel might do something like that, and now it's not going to happen, and they are very, very upset. Now, I also think that it's more important to apply the sovereignty in the context of the plan. I thought this was a golden opportunity, unique opportunity. God knows if it's going to repeat itself. I don't know if Trump is going to win elections or not. Since it's not. And so it was a golden opportunity that was missed, and it's a pity. But the failure of Netanyahu was not in missing the cue for having something good like peace with UAE on the price of giving up a plan that was not going to be implemented anyhow. This was a smart move by Bibi, but where he was short of doing the right thing for all kinds of reasons that are not under his control, and I must say the truth, was convincing Trump to support the application of the law and sovereignty of Israel on these parts in the context of the peace plan, of his peace plan. And that Bibi didn't manage to deliver. And we all know the reasons, because the situation in the United States has changed dramatically since January, because there is a COVID-19, because Trump was given advice by all kinds of people, and because, amongst other things, coming back to the domestic issue, because Trump was not convinced that Israel is united behind this move. He heard, when Pompeo was here in May, he heard Gantz and Ashkenazi, and they were not that much in favor of it. So this is what made Trump decide not to support it. Now we have to remember that there are three kinds of opposition to the application of the sovereignty. One kind is saying, well, look, these are Palestinian lands. Why would you do that? It's annexation. This land belongs to somebody else. Why do you take it? This attitude, you hear it from many people. Many people on the left and many people in Europe. You know, I wrote a letter. I hope you.
Yeah, I did.
And if you disseminate it to your people in PINSKER, I'll be delighted. Boris Johnson, your prime minister, wrote us a letter, and he said, these are Palestinian lands. I said, what? These are not Palestinian lands. These are Jewish lands, and you, as the prime minister of the majestic Britannic government, should know that first and foremost, because this was the language of the mandate you got from the League of Nations that was never changed, to establish a Jewish homeland in this piece that was historically connected to the Jewish people. So this is not annexation, but many people think this was annexation. This was taking somebody else's land. There was never a Palestinian land. There was never a Palestinian state. We didn't take anybody's land. These are disputed land, but the first and foremost, they're ours. And so this is one line of opposition. Okay, that's with this we have a problem. These people have a point, an opinion. There is another line of opposition to the applying of the law that says this is very dangerous. There are going to be all kinds of repercussions from around the Arab world and from the international community, and from the Europeans are going to take sanctions, and the Palestinians are going to start an intifada, and I don't know what's going to happen. The skies are going to fall. This line of thinking was a line of thinking of Trump. He thought this is going to cause a lot of trouble for Israel. And why should Israel go through this trouble? And then people will blame me. Let's avoid it. We have a way to avoid it. Let's move towards the UAE. And there's a third line of opposition, which says that Why should we change the paradigm? We had such a big, wonderful paradigm. If we change the paradigm and it works, it means that the paradigm we were committed to throughout all these years was wrong. This is the paradigm change that is happening now anyhow, because the paradigm has changed anyhow. It's so it's not changed in the context of the application of the law. It is changed in the context of establishing diplomatic relations with the pragmatic Arabs, because the same paradigm that was against it was also against was trying to tell us. This was Kerzer and Indik and all these people who kept telling, and even now it's difficult for them to believe that it's happening. It's they don't want it to happen because they are afraid that this is going to kill the paradigm. They were telling us and misleading us. You know, there's an exchange of tweets with Martin Indik in the last few days. I told him, you were selling us this nonsense that we cannot have public diplomatic relations with the UAE all these years. You told us you have to give the Palestinians everything they want, and then you will have relations with the UAE. And now it turns out that your paradigm was wrong. Admit that you were misleading us for all these years. You were misleading us, and he is not ready to admit it. And he said, yeah, well, you have to make calculated risks for peace. Rabin said. I told him. Rabin said that we shall keep the Jordan Valley and we shall have Jerusalem united, and that the Palestinians are not going to have a state, but less than a state. That's calculated risk. What you want us to do is to go back to Road 6, to 67 lines, to put ourselves in the hands of the Palestinians. That's what you want us to do. It's and you insisted on us giving this to the Palestinians, and you told us the story that unless we do that, we cannot have relations with the UAE, open relations with the UAE. So look, we are having open relations with the UAE, and we didn't give up anything. It's that's the third line of opposition. And people, for most of these people, it's so difficult to accept. They don't want this reality to come true, because it means that they were bullshitting us for all these years. And this is very difficult for them to accept. But what happened with Trump was he's for the second kind. He was afraid that something bad is going to happen on the ground, and we were not able to convince the American administration that we can withhold this terrible thing that's going to happen. So it's going to be a couple of weeks of unrest, and then everything is going to come back to order. It's not going to be eternal. We shall overcome. We are ready to pay a price. We know we'll pay a price, but we are ready to do that. This didn't work with Trump, and so we had to settle for the second prize.
To bring it back to the topic of this event, which is, you know, Israel and the UAE, are we making a more stable region? I will sort of put that question to you. Does this move make the Middle East a more stable place? And if so, or if not, why?
In the long term, for sure. In the short term, as I said, some people may try to react. But in the long term, first of all, we have a stronger bond between Israel and the pragmatic states. This is going to strengthen the pragmatists, and by that will make the Middle East a better place, a more calm place. And the second thing is that in the long run, this will, if it works out well, and I hope it works out well, maybe we should really keep those Israelis back here. If it works out well, I'm sure this is going to serve as an example for other states. You can have warm peace with Israel. It's in your benefit. And I'm sure, I know, I listen to the Iraqis, for example. The Iraqis say, why actually, what is the reason we're fighting Israel? Why? Did Israel did anything bad to us? This is Iraq. Many people in Lebanon are saying that. Lebanon is a problematic place, but anyhow, but many of them do say that. And of course, many people in the Gulf. So we can see, and you know, so many Saudis go on social media and say, there was a program on Ramadan in Saudi Arabia that had this message on official television. So it's this is the feeling within many rounds, many circles in the Arab world. And if we do it right, and we have to invest in doing it right. If we do it right, it's going to be an example that will make the Middle East a new Middle East, in the sense that Israel is going to be a part of it, And this is for the best interest of the Middle East.
Well, I think that's sort of where we're going to wrap it up. A new Middle East and a new, more hopeful and more stable Middle East. Thank you very, very, very much, Yossi, for being with us this evening, and thank you everyone who joined us tonight. And please stay tuned. Thank you very much.